Were you surprised at the outcome?
Well, 6 months ago, if you'd asked me the outcome, I would have guessed, probably like everyone else, that David Vitter was going to be the victor. But in the few days before the election, if you'd asked me, I would have predicted, based on what the polls showed, that Jon Bel was going to be the winner.
Yeah. So why don't you take us through, if you don't mind, when you start, I'd like to, if I could do, so like a history of what happened with you from your perspective. So when did you first get involved with the election?
Well, I covered the legislative session for the Advocate, and that was not directly covering the governor's race, but it was sort of something that you kept an eye on. But the race didn't really get going until qualifying, I would say, which was early September. By then, Scott Angell had begun making a run. He had broadcast some early commercials to try to tell contributors and the political elite that he was a serious candidate, and had some success doing that. By then, Jay Darden had entered the race as the lieutenant governor, and by then Jon Bel Edwards had been running for 2 years more, and then of course Vitter had announced very early and was seen as the prohibitive favorite by the time of qualifying again in September.
Now, you actually wrote, I think, a really absolutely terrific article that I read, I think it was Sunday, that's on the Advocate, and that I certainly would recommend that everybody read. And so you talked about the early days that Jon Bel Edwards was involved in talking about running. Why don't you take us through that?
Sure. I think the origins of this year's governor's race, or the 2011 legislative elections, you'll remember in 2011 there wasn't much of a governor's race. Bobby Jindal was too strong politically, so the Democratic Party didn't even mount a serious campaign against him. But at the same time, the Republicans were trying to extend their majority, particularly in the state house, had a real strong effort to take out a bunch of white conservative Democrats in white majority districts. And Jon Bel Edwards led the effort to stop that and was very successful, though I don't think the Republicans were able to knock off any of those conservative white Democrats in the House. And that was a lesson, as Jon Bel Edwards told me later, that you could beat Republicans with a very focused Louisiana message with the right candidates. And after that, Edwards eventually decided in January of 2013, and that's how I began the article that you referred to, Steve, by just saying, hey, I don't think I can achieve that much here in the House anymore. I'm too frustrated with Bobby Jindal as governor. I've got to go big or go home. And so he said that to State Representative Sam Jones, his seatmate and friend, in January of 2013. And then a month later, he was on Jim Angster's radio show, and Jim caught Edwards by surprise by asking him, well, are you going to run for governor? And Edwards told me afterwards that he had not really expected that question, although it's a little surprising. And that's probably due to his inexperience as a candidate. And there was a split second in his mind where he was asking himself whether he should be like the typical politician and say, I'm considering it, I'm looking at it. But he thought to himself, I've been telling people I'm planning to run, so why don't I just say it? So he gave the honest answer, yeah, I do intend to run for governor. And that caught the small number of people that he'd been telling, that caught them by surprise, because he had been planning to answer to have a big press conference and announcement after the legislative session ended in 2013 and maximize the press. He didn't do that because of what he blurted out that day in February 2013 on Angster's show, and that was a kind of a fumbled beginning and that made an already difficult campaign really nearly impossible.
When you say nearly impossible, you're saying nearly impossible for him.
Nearly impossible for Jon Bel Edwards to win. Vitter was seen as too strong, and if it wasn't going to be Vitter, certainly another Republican. Just, you know, the Democrats just haven't had a good history, as you know, in Louisiana in recent years, a deep red state. So the idea of a Democratic state representative not known could be the next governor, very few people gave him a chance.
At that time, were there any others who were seriously considered running? I don't think so, but your recollection?
I don't know at that point, but other names did surface along the way. Jim Bernhardt, the former owner of Shaw, certainly looked at it. The owner of the Advocate newspaper, John Georges, was flirted with the idea, and I think right up till the end, former General Honore, I think he looked at it, but in the end, and then of course the mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, who would have been the biggest Democrat to get in the race. And I think it was funny enough that the weakness that Jon Bel had, or the chances that a Democrat had of winning, the perceived weakness ended up being a strength of his, because he was the only Democrat who got in the race, and that was key for his strategy. And that was key, for example, for Jay Darden's strategy was to have two Democrats split the Democratic vote and allow him to get in the runoff with Vitter and defeat Vitter.
Did Darden expect Angel to jump in? Do you know?
What's the question?
I'm sorry, did Jay Darden, did he expect Angel to jump in? I know that there was talk about John Kennedy, but do you know whether or not he expected Scott Angel to jump in, who actually did better than Darden did?
I don't know if he expected specifically Scott Angel to jump in, but I think he thought another fairly big name Republican would get in no matter what.